Hey y'all, welcome to this episode of Corporate Quitter. If you're watching this on YouTube, I look like a fucking scrub today, okay? I am not this is how I'm showing up for myself today is by doing the bare minimum and literally just being in my pajamas and hanging out and doing what I can. And also, apparently so is my cat. So I'm sorry if he's in the background doing things and you're distracted, but if you do want a good show, I guess watch on YouTube today versus just listening to the audio. But before we get into today's episode, I just want to thank our sponsor, Novo. They're not a bank, they're a fintech company. They've been helping me basically with my business in all forms pertaining to money and saving and taxes and things like that. Now, another cool announcement is that if you are in Austin or Texas, quitter, I mean, you don't have to necessarily be a quitter, but if you're in this community and you'd like to network with other business owners, Novo and I are co-hosting an event that's happening August 15th here in Austin. We have a registration link for that available. I think we're welcoming about 60 people to the event, so that'll be really fun. It's perfect for those of you who are looking to not only network with other business owners, but also want to talk with other business owners on how they're running their business efficiently, especially when the economy looks like it does right now, when you're trying to quit your job and you're trying to scale things and build things out, but you're like, money's tight, things aren't as smooth as it used to be. How do you prepare for the future, right? So we're all going to collaborate as business owners together, have thorough and really deep conversations on this, have a good time, and also get some expert advice from those who have kind of gone through those trials and triumphs, during maybe the 2008 crash or just really any point in time, who maybe have had some difficulties. So I'm really excited about this event now. I have a couple friends who are going to be part of it, which is really great. So if you're interested, we'll have the link in the show notes as well as the YouTube description, and I hope to see you there. Now let's get into today's episode. So like I mentioned in the beginning, this is how I'm showing up for myself today. And one of the reasons why I'm talking about showing up is because I recently finished this book, The Art of Showing Up by Rachel Wilkerson Miller. So I've actually had this book for a while. I think I purchased it about 7 months ago on a whim when I went for a walk. And I've kind of dabbled with it very, very slowly because part of it is I needed to have a conversation with myself of like, what does friendship look like as an entrepreneur in this stage of my life? And also like, what does fucking showing up for myself and for others look like? So the way that you show up for yourself and show up for others will obviously be very different from when you are a corporate quitter because, right, your whole schedule changes, your routine changes. Also, the way that you view yourself drastically changes. I mean, I used to take and tolerate so much fucking bullshit in corporate because of the job, right? Because of the paycheck. Especially as women, we're like, oh, it's fine. We'll let it go. We'll let it go. We'll let it go. Men are, I think, more easily encouraged to point out things that are not okay, or this is a problem, or this is a boundary that's pushed or something, and they won't necessarily get backlash for it. Or if they do, it's a little less harsh in my opinion. But I'm also a really outspoken, loud New York City bitch, so it could have just been a personality thing. I don't know. I'm also bringing this up too because I've had multiple conversations around showing up in general with some of my clients and some quitters in the community, but also because this past week, if you guys were following on Instagram stories, that's where literally all the fucking tea is. I had this whole incident happen where basically I was invited to a bachelorette party, whole like group of high school girlfriends. Haven't really been connected with them for years. We've kind of gone our separate ways. I would say we were friends because of history, not because we actually had mutual shit in common anymore. And I don't drink anymore. Like there's just way too many things that are just different from where we were when we were a kid. We're kids. I was appreciative that they invited me to a bachelorette trip. I declined, but I've been talking about the wedding industry a lot on socials and stuff, especially with a couple of things going on, like the Bridezilla thing, who told basically one of her bridesmaids to take out a $20K loan to come on a trip with her and do all these things for her wedding, which is fucking insane. And of course, right, I interviewed John Branch a few weeks ago for wedding photography. So naturally, I'm really interested, and also because me and my boyfriend I wouldn't say we're talking about marriage, but like it's really serious. So those things are kind of top of mind for me. So anyway, call me a shitty friend or, whatever. Maybe the timing was bad, but I ended up speaking online about the wedding industry, and she took it really personally. And I guess, again, maybe bad timing on my part. But so this whole thing happened. And basically what it came down to was like, we're not friends anymore. So me and those girls that tie was completely severed because of some things that had gone on as a result of that entire situation. I'm not going to get into details of that because I just want to put it to rest. But I do think that it also kind of falls into the concept of this book, which is like showing up for yourself and for others, especially in the age of flakiness, right? So this is kind of a two-parter. Part one is basically how to be there for yourself. And part two is like how to be there for others, right? Because this isn't just a one-sided game. You can't just like be there for other people and not be there for yourself, and vice versa. There's a level of balance between the two, especially if you're anything like me, and you, at least at a younger age, I didn't like my relationships. The people that I was friends with, they didn't care about me. They didn't remember important things. They didn't notice anything. They didn't, I wouldn't say acknowledge or ask the right questions. And maybe that's a little bit mean of me to say, but if you're genuinely a good friend, like you care about that person's well-being and what's going on in their life, and you care about getting to know them. And at the same time, I had to then double back and look at myself and say like, well, girlie, are you yourself? Am I respecting my needs? And am I getting to know myself better, as well as my friendships, right? There was like a multi-angled sort of thing that had to happen in my younger years, but also within the past, because as a corporate quitter, you are going to greatly change. So for those of you who are still at your job, one thing I always talk about is the quitter hangover is a thing, and you are going to experience it when all hell breaks loose after you quit, and you are going to have to purge the fucking demons, kind of, sort of. For those who have quit, you're either going through the quitter hangover or you made it through. Congratulations, because it's hard. And so when that happens, this showing up for yourself is going to be a big fucking deal. Also, I don't know if you guys see, for those watching on YouTube, my cat is fucking running around like crazy. So I hope y'all are enjoyed by that. You can multi-view entertainment in this episode. But so the first part, so how to be there for yourself, right? That's the most important thing, especially when you're a quitter. You have made the decision now to leave your job, and basically you're like, nope, I'm going to be here for myself when it comes to finances, mental health, creating friendships, right? Establishing my network, building on that network, all of those things. You've passed the baton to have the responsibility of being there for yourself, right? Essentially, the biggest thing that happens with having a job and relying on an employer is that like you have to rely on someone else to be there for you, right? In your paycheck, in your insurance, in routines, like perks, like I don't know, all of these things, right? So passing the baton to you can be really hard. So the first thing is when you're going to do when you quit your job, and also when you're trying to practice this new level of being there for yourself, you have to get to know yourself, this new version of yourself. So the routines, the books you read, the people you hung out with, all of these things are going to change greatly. And so if you haven't already, you have to be open and have that conversation with yourself of like, okay, the things that we've been doing aren't going to be working anymore. What would this new version of me do? What sort of hobbies, what sort of activities would this person kind of partake in? And that doesn't mean you spend a lot of money to like go on a retreat and do these things, or even take up hobbies, because I know they can be expensive, but it's more of like little dabblings here and there to try to figure out who you are, this new version of you. The second part is setting boundaries. That's easier said than done, again, especially for women. And if you yourself are conditioned, like I was, to be a people pleaser, it's really difficult to set boundaries. Now, speaking of boundaries, and like going back to like the whole drama that happened this week, like I more often than not have found that it's really difficult to try to set boundaries with people who you already have relationships with. It doesn't mean that it's not possible, but for example, family, it's really difficult when your family has known you for like 30 fucking years, and then you try to say like, hey, I actually don't like when you do this thing, or when you reference this or something like that. If you've been kind of like letting it go all these years, you can't teach an old dog new tricks type thing. Like it's really difficult to rewire that sort of relationship or those boundaries. The other thing too that happens when setting boundaries and having these conversations with existing connections is I found that like they liked you for a specific reason, and sometimes that reason wasn't a good thing, and they might not even be aware of it. So in this particular friend group, I was always the DD. I was always like the mom of the group. I was always managing shit, worrying about people, like putting everyone before me, as well as being the punching bag / jokester of the group. So like when I was younger, I just kind of dealt with it, right? I just kind of like let it be. They were my girlfriends. We had a good time, whatever else. We'd go get shit-faced to be silly and stupid and whatever. But like there wasn't that much depth. We didn't really have those deep moments. There wasn't really anything more there, which is fine, right? There are different relationships that require different levels of depth, and that's okay, right? Those just might be like your third connections versus like your first connections with the people who you can like literally sob in front of, be all snot covered, and go through the worst fucking thing, and they'll still be there for you. But so these people, I was beneficial in their life because of the way that I allowed them to treat me, right? That's what it is. They weren't treating me a certain way. I taught them that it was okay for them to treat me that way. Same thing in my corporate job, right? I couldn't then go back on managers and colleagues and people that I worked with and try to change the way that they were kind of doing business, if you will, with me, right? How I overextended myself and made myself available to everyone. It's really hard to go back against that. I'm not saying go to the chopping block and tell everyone to go fuck off. But what I am saying is that it's a lot easier if you yourself get to know your new version of self, do that sort of work that you need to understand, okay, what does respect in this new version of my life look like? Does it mean not taking shit? Like in this scenario with these girlfriends, like there was no coming back. And I knew that at a young age, but we didn't yet have that moment, that pivotal moment like we did this week to be like, oh, okay, no, this is the behavior that has always been there. Just I was never in the crosshairs, right? So it's really easy to practice those new boundaries with new connections first, and or at just least flex that muscle, right? But now, you know, it's one thing to, okay, get to know yourself, set the boundaries with existing people if you can. In that process, learn how to respect yourself and your needs. But then also the last is basically practicing communicating your needs to others. So even though I'm sure it can happen with friends, I have found the easiest way for me to learn how to communicate my needs has been through my relationships, like my intimate relationships. So actually my current boyfriend has been a phenomenal like poker essentially. So he can tell when something's off, he can tell when I'm mad, and he does a really good job of being like, bitch, what the fuck? I mean, he doesn't call me a bitch, but he's like, yo, like something's obviously wrong. What's the matter? Please tell me. And like in the beginning, I would still tiptoe on eggshells, right? I wouldn't really communicate my needs because I wanted to like be at least in my younger years, I wanted to be the chill girl. And now I just like, he's like, honestly, I still love you. Like, just tell me how it is. Like, we'll work through it. So long as we both love each other, we'll always come back to home. But if you don't tell me what's wrong, I can't fix it. And if we can't fix it, this is a means to an end. And like, when you really love each other, you're willing to communicate your needs to others. And when someone fucks up, which we'll get into later, how to kind of handle that, we figure out a way to make it work, right? But again, harder to be done with existing connections than new connections, unless it's a solid, deep, really solid relationship. When it comes to showing up for yourself, you may think of like, oh, the bubble baths and the self-care books and all that shit, go to Louis Vuitton and drop all this money on a designer bag because girly wants to feel hot and fine, right? No. Sometimes showing up for yourself is eating alone at work, right? Taking the time to yourself and not responding to anyone. Fucking masturbating, because let's be honest, everyone needs it. Blocking and reporting trolls online, like scrolling on your phone for an hour in bed while you sit in your towel after a fucking shower that you haven't got changed yet. Like those are examples of what I think actually showing up for yourself looks like versus more of the mainstream sort of fucking overconsumption bullshit culture that's kind of taken over the web. Not to say that those things aren't bad, right? I'm a girly who loves my Sunday reset. I do a face mask. I do like a very low grade chemical peel. Like I have my press on nails. Like I have versions of what showing up for myself look like, but every single person is going to be different. And also like we're in an economic weird fucking place right now. Like you don't need to spend a zillion dollars either when it comes to showing up. Showing up is just more of like taking inventory of like what presently you need and then going and doing it. Right. So that's first, right? How to be there for yourself. When you're there for yourself, then you can then be there for other people. That's the way it works, at least in a really, really foundationally like solid way, right? Of course, this is like not perfect, right? I think I was showing up for others first, but then like neglecting myself. So then I had to basically like go back, be there for myself, learn that, and then reestablish friends. But I feel like I always have to go back and reestablish new boundaries and new levels of like, I don't want to say my queenly state, but like the no bullshit fucking thermometer needs to fucking be gurgitated and refixed and calibrated. And then I can go back to then being there for others and making new friends and acquaintances. So, again, there's no right or wrong with this, but just be aware for that. Now, when it comes to being there for others, there is a sort of, I don't want to say skill, and I don't want to say that there's a method to the madness, right? Because it doesn't come down to like checking boxes and shit like that. But I will say like, I would definitely recommend reading this book, or at least like I'll sift through it every so often to just double check and like make sure like, am I honoring my friends and doing this way and whatever else? Because there is a science. And some of the things that they talk about that I found really helpful was like how to make new friends, right? Because it's actually really hard as an adult, but it's even harder when you're not in corporate, right? You're not in the same environment and place every single day. And also like how to actually care and keep a friends, because that's great. You met a new acquaintance, but it's like, now what? Then it's like the art of noticing and what happens when someone fucks up, right? Because people are going to fuck up. We're human. So you need to figure out and have sort of conversations with yourself of like, at what degree of fuck up is allowed, and at what fuck up degree are you like, nah, man, like this says too much about your character. I'm not about that. So when it comes to making new friends when you're not in corporate, the most obvious is like keep going to the same places, right? So if you want to meet up with new business owners, go to meetups, right? Consistently go to the same meetup place. You want to keep going there to establish those connections. And again, that recurring sort of like seeing of the same people, it reinforces that relationship, even if they're in small bites, right? This doesn't have to be just business related. It can be things like, going to your gym and going to the same workout class. It can be like going to the library at certain points in time. I mean, hell, I've made friends and acquaintances just because we go to the same coffee shop and we end up journaling or whatever, doing work, and working on our shit like 10 a.m.s on Tuesday. Like, it doesn't have to be so complex where you're like married to a certain schedule. But I will say it's a lot easier when you're kind of in the same sort of like either place doing the same thing, or you're just in the same vicinity and you have some familiarity with that person. The other thing too with making new friends is like, you can also take advantage of online friends that become real life friends. So that's the benefit of me doing things online and podcasting and stuff like that, is that like I end up connecting with a lot of girlies in Austin on the internet, and then eventually we either run into each other, which is crazy, or one of us is like, hey, do you want to grab a drink or something like that? I think you're really dope. And like that's a muscle that I'm still flexing, because to me I'm nervous and I get a lot of anxiety around inviting people out sometimes. I've been burned before by meeting up with people in the sense of like, wasted time, wasted effort and things like that. But you can't come from that mindset. And that's something I've been trying to rewire for a long time, of like, I have value to bring. Other people have value to bring. I can't judge people ahead of time. And also, just because someone maybe doesn't necessarily have something to offer, or you're not in the same industry, or you're not playing the same game, right? In this case, if you're a quitter and they're not, like, that doesn't mean that you won't have a good relationship. And it doesn't mean that you won't have a good connection. Like, you can be friends for different reasons. But the next thing they talked about is like the care of keeping of friends, which I think is the biggest battle, because it's actually really easy to go out and like be around people, but then actually to keep that connection and build up with it requires actually a significant amount of effort. When I mean significant, I mean more so like the small things that become significant. So checking in on people, inviting them to things, keep inviting, keep reaching out. And I don't mean to be annoying, but if you actively see someone who you think is cool and you have a girl crush on, like there was this one friend of mine who my boyfriend mentioned I should be friends with her, or he thought she was cool. I then thought she was cool and I was like fangirling, but I was too nervous to reach out to her. Luckily, we ran into each other because we go to a lot of the same places. And then thankfully, thank the lucky stars, she said, oh, I think you're cool. I would love to hang out. And I was like, thank you. Like, I wanted to do this, but I was too nervous to reach out because I am a scared girly. But in that case, right, so we ended up like becoming friends. And now, every so often, like flex that muscle of like, just be like, hey, how's your day? Do you need support in this? Do you need that? Do you need this? Like, hey, how was your show? What's going on with the podcast? Like these small little tidbits that show that you care, which goes into the next thing of like the art of noticing, which is like actually recognizing when someone might need support, when they might need some help, and also figuring out like, what would you want, right? Because part of it is like you want friends who are, I wouldn't say like you, but you want them to show up the same way that you would show up, right? We're not here for conditional friends, but you want someone who's going to show up pretty similarly. So when it comes to noticing, sometimes it's just really basic things. Like if you can't remember someone's birthday, that's fine. But I think birthdays are important, right? It just signifies that you give a fuck. So in your little agenda, write down whose birthdays are important to you. I have it in the beginning of my agenda where there's actual like dates for the year. And I have down like my mom, my boyfriend, all these different people whose like dates, whose birthdays are important for me. They're important for me to remember, or at least the month itself, right? Now there's other things too. We don't want to get like weird and technical about this, but I actually do this pretty often, especially with like newer connections, but I'll actually create a note in my phone with their name and then like maybe certain things that they like. I did this more with people I dated to remember important things like, oh, this person loves apple pie and they love like Lord of the Rings and this and that. Like I am putting in the TLC and care of getting to know that person and caring about their interests and their needs and the things that they're desiring and love, so that maybe in turn there are people out there who would do the same for me. So like some things I'll put in is like their favorite color, names of their favorite shows, maybe like someone important in their life, like a nephew, a spouse, a brother, a fucking pet. Pets, easy. So just in the notes app of your phone, get used to continually taking note of certain things. Now the other thing with noticing, I'll just mention for like a hot second, is that like also noticing can look like spotting red flags and like warning signs. And I don't mean this in like, oh, they're a bad friend. I just mean more so like they might need help, right? Whether it's mental or behavioral like signs, like physical signs, like habits that are not good. Like, and that doesn't mean like when you first meet someone and you see that they're like drinking too much, you're like, hey, actually that's not a good idea. No, like I'm not talking about that, but I more so mean if you're establishing a new friendship and you're building on that friendship and you're noticing certain behaviors that are not congruent with what this person is saying, like I, in my new friendships, would love if someone would be like, hey, I see that you're doing this. Like, I just want to make sure you're okay. Like, and not from a place of judgment, but a place from like genuinity. It can go far. But again, I know these things happen when you're like closer to someone. It makes more sense. And obviously, like, none of the behaviors of like, oh, they're drinking or doing this are necessarily behaviors to be called for that are like serious, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that an intervention needs to be had. But if you're really interested in showing up for others, you have to show up in the way that you'd want people to show up for you, which goes right to the first part of showing up and being there for yourself. Now, I would say the last part of this, of like what happens when someone fucks up, is a new sort of concept for me. Because to be transparent, I was raised that I was to be polite and not outspoken. And like, we never really talked about conflict resolution. Like, we sort of did, but not really. And so it was always like, oh, just let it go. Oh, just let it go. Like, you can pinpoint specific things, but it was never like firm, assertive, sort of like, hey, I don't like this and this is not working for me sort of communication. Now, in my relationships, I'm learning how to do that. So when it comes to communication, I first started with easy things, which was like basically words of affirmation, right? Telling people that I love them, telling people that I care for them, and sharing when I was just excited about something, like, hey, it was really meaningful when you did XYZ for me. I really appreciate it. And not in a way to like manipulate them, but like to truly to flex my communication muscles, because you got to get good at communicating before you can communicate the bad shit, right? So work on communicating the good stuff so that when you get to communicating the bad things, it's not as like abrasive or fucking just like the whole world is fucking ending. Because in the beginning of my journey, when I started to try to communicate when things weren't working, it was explosive, it was built up, it was just like me against you, essentially, right? But what I've realized over time, with the right connections, that's the prime thing, the good friends, the good connections, the friendships that are built on something of meaningful value and like a solid foundation, like it's not fucking flaky at all, it's not phony, it's real, is that basically instead of it being you versus me, it's you and I versus the problem at hand, or the issue or the boundary that was broken. That's it, right? So that actually was 2 boyfriends ago. He brought that perspective up to me, and I was like, wow, that's actually something that like that changed the way I thought about things. Because for forever it was like, this person did this thing to me and fuck them and blah blah blah, but we're fucking human. Like, you're gonna fuck up, it's natural, right? So when you just change the perspective of it's you and I versus the problem at hand, it completely changes the perspective, and then you can find resolution, right? And it's no longer so abrasive or aggressive as like, this person did this to me. Now, the next part is practicing, which is really hard. Now, like I said before, to me, it was easier to practice communication with someone who I was intimate with, because like they've seen it all, right? You have a deeper connection. My boyfriend has seen me cry, scream, like he's seen me sick, he's seen me healthy. So like we've already kind of established we're going to love each other no matter what. So I felt comfortable, and he made me feel comfortable enough to share the not so sexy things. And now our communication is really fucking good. So if something bothers me, I mention it to him and we get through it. And like, that's that, right? Now with friends is a little dicier, especially with women. But the really hard part about dealing with shitty things is to respond in the moment. Like, if something bad happens, you gotta nip it in the bud, right? You got to address it then and there. If you do have to address it with them and it's after the fact, you want to make sure that you separate what they did from who they are, because sometimes we just make shitty decisions and it's not actually like who we are as people. It's not a good judge of character, right? It's just a fuck up. Now, the thing is, we don't want to assume that someone knows that it was bad, because again, we're all human and we've had different experiences, but we do want to say like, basically what happened. So like, hey, this comment you made about XYZ made me feel XYZ, and now I don't feel good about this, or this is making me not want to hang out as much, or something like that. But right now we're not pinpointing, right? You just want to basically state the consequences of that behavior. So like, hey, you made a comment about my body. Now I don't feel comfortable going out because I don't feel comfortable in my clothes. Whatever you say, like, keep it short. You don't want to go on and on and on. If you're ranting, that means that like you're not ready to have a conversation. That means you got to like sit down with your shit a little bit and kind of go through it and see what the root of it is. Is it actually that they said something and hurt you? Or is this a festering wound that you haven't healed yet? And or is this someone that you might need to let go of because they keep pushing boundaries and doing shit like this? Now, even though someone might have fucked up and you might think, oh, it's so blatantly obvious that this person fucked up, like how could they not know that they fucked up? Like, there's a good chance that they also didn't think that they fucked up. Like, they're just not aware of it. And that's okay too. Because again, we're human. We want to make it easier to be friends with people by telling them very openly and honestly, like, hey, this really hurt my feelings. Now, that's just an example of like something that's small. There are like times when your friend is wilding out and you got to fucking do something about it. Or in this case, like, cut people out like I had to do at the beginning of this week. But again, like, I'm going to keep reverting to this book because she's an expert and I'm not. I just felt it was helpful to share that basically, if you're trying to change your friends, if you're trying to better respect yourself and your boundaries, and also like as a business owner, right, respect yourself and your boundaries because you yourself are changing and your needs are changing and your world is changing. Like, this might be something to greatly consider. Okay, so this episode was way longer than I thought it was going to be. At this point, I think I'm rambling a little bit. I hope it was helpful, and I hope that Mr. Tom, my cat in the back, wasn't too distracting, or at least the way that I look right now isn't too distracting. I'm literally in pajamas, and like, I haven't washed my face today, guys, but it's fine. So anyway, have a great week, and I will talk to you guys soon.